Unit 10, Part 3, the first part of excited delirium. So we're going to cover off excited delirium, and hopefully we'll start on toxicology this morning, and then we'll wrap up with toxicology next week, and flight physiology and diving physiology. And then we have a test on April the 23rd. So let's go through this fairly quickly. This was adopted from a presentation in the U.S. at Beloit Memorial Hospital. And let's talk about in-custody deaths first, and why some people die from in-custody deaths or following a violent confrontation with police. And what the role of the taser is, if there's any role whatsoever, what the role of the patient position is, if any, role of EMS. So, typical scenario where there's an in-custody death or a violence-related death with police, typically it's a male subject creating some sort of disturbance. Someone calls 911 as a result, and it's obvious to police that the person is going to resist. There's a struggle that ensues with multiple officers, and that may involve less than lethal weapons such as pepper spray, taser, chokeholds, batons, etc. And physical restraints are applied. The subject's subdued, typically in a prone position, so they can handcuff them. Officers kneel on the legs, on the back, on the arms. Handcuffs or ankle cuffs are applied. Hog tying, hobble restraint, so that's wrist to ankle, sometimes is used. And then the whole question of prone versus lateral position. Usually they're kept prone until they're sort of lifted up and put into a squad car and taken to jail. And there's a continued struggle that occurs against the restraints, and that sometimes damages the squad car. There's and then followed by an apparent resolution period where the subject starts to calm down and then slips into unconsciousness. Breathing becomes labored and shallow, and followed by unexpected sudden death. And typically when that occurs, resuscitation efforts are futile. I haven't heard of a single case yet of a true excited delirium who went into cardiac arrest who was successfully resuscitated, and that's because of a whole cascade of metabolic complications associated with excited delirium. So according to a Los Angeles County EMS study, 18 emergency department deaths witnessed by paramedics, all were restrained. In 13, the rhythm was documented. VT and asystole were the most common rhythms at the time of cardiac arrest. Not a single case of ventricular fibrillation, but it's a small number of cases. And all failed resuscitation. So what happens when the press gets a hold of it? Well, they typically report that the patient died after being shocked with a taser, which is, when we hear shocked after taser, we think the taser must be the culprit because of that. So it implies cause and effect. And there's a Latin term for that, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore, because of this. And this is sometimes referred to as a logical fallacy, and understand that correlation doesn't always equal causation, right? But this is a common inference that people make. So several weeks later, the autopsy results come in, and they find the cause of the death is excited delirium, secondary to illicit stimulant drug abuse, with concurrent medical problems, sort of all of that superimposed on comorbidities, and minimal injuries as a result of the police confrontation. But it wasn't the taser after all, and this happens over and over again, and in this case, officers were exonerated. So here's a question from your previous training. Do tasers cause death? Okay. Just waiting for a few answers to come in. So sometimes they can, no, well, anything could cause death. Usually have comorbidities, not directly. So the simple answer is no, they don't cause death directly. But the question is, so they don't stimulate smooth muscle. They don't have any effect on the heart whatsoever. But the question is, are they exacerbating an already hypermetabolic state? That's the question. So I think what we've learned from the past, and in particular that incident that happened at the Vancouver airport, is that when you've got someone with excited delirium who's in a hypermetabolic state, they're breaking down muscle, they've got rhabdomyolysis, they've got release of myoglobin, clogging of the nephrons, metabolic acidosis brewing, that when you do repeated taser discharges, you're increasing skeletal muscle contraction, you're exacerbating that state. So time and time again, the coroners, the medical officers of health will tell you, not the medical officers of health, but the chief coroners will say again and again, tasers do not cause death. But the whole takedown combined with the tasers, I think, in my opinion at least, can contribute to death. And that's because of this hypermetabolic state and the fact that tasers exacerbate that situation. So once the patient stops struggling, his condition will improve. True or false? So false, false, very false. Okay, that's correct. So it's false. Usually that means they're going to cardiac arrest or they're already in cardiac arrest. So what is the cause of death in excited delirium? Hypermetabolic state, hyperthermia, metabolic acidosis, or D, all of the above? D's your final answer. Excellent. Okay, yep, D, exactly. Good. So what happens when muscle breakdown occurs as a result of the struggle between police and patient? Okay, rhabdo, kidney failure, good. Thanks, Roger. Yeah, so there's rhabdomyolysis, there's breakdown of muscle, there's clogging of the nephrons by the myoglobin, there's release of potassium, so there's a hyperkalemia and a metabolic acidosis that takes place, all of those things. And what roles do physical restraint, restraining technique, and restraint position play in excited delirium deaths? Any thoughts on that one? Please feel free to jump on the mic.
Like say if we have a patient with a metabolic acidosis, we want to be very careful about anything that's going to impair their ability to compensate with their respiration, which is likely what this.
Okay, so we don't want to put them in a position that's going to compromise their respiration. So yes and no. We'll talk about that in a second. Any other thoughts on that? So let's take a look at what the research has shown. So this is someone who's hogtied, who's put down, and the recommendation now is that they're not hogtied, that they're not put face down. The research is interesting. So one of the theories around, or one of the hypotheses around the cause of death or contributing factors to death is this concept of positional asphyxia. So deaths that occur with subjects in the prone position. The theory is that it restricts breathing, but according to the research, the role of position is still a little unclear. Now the trouble is, you can't really do research by randomizing excited delirium patients to one group that gets put in a lateral or a supine position and another group that gets put in the prone position. So what they did was they they studied healthy subjects. Now, what the research shows, at least based on what we could do with healthy subjects, is suggested that other factors are likely the culprits, more likely that hypermetabolic states, the metabolic acidosis, the hyperkalemia. So what one study found was there was no clinically significant changes in pulmonary function tests in healthy volunteers. And again, I guess the emphasis is on healthy. So restraint asphyxia theoretically increases deaths in restrained patients. One rat study found a threefold increase in cocaine-related deaths among restrained rats. So it's not the position so much, but the restraining. And sorry, I'm laughing because it just sounds like such an absurd study. But numerous other studies have shown that restraint position is not a cause of death. But again, this is in either rats or healthy subjects. So this is now routinely rejected in the courts based for this reason. So it isn't. It's not the position, but it's probably the excited delirium, and the restraint probably has some role in there. So tasers in themselves are not lethal weapons, and it's not the voltage, it's the amperage that's dangerous, and the tasers have a high voltage, 50,000 volts, but a very low amperage. And the 26 taser delivers about 19 pulses per second, causes generalized skeletal muscle contraction. High voltage affects the peripheral nerves, the neuromuscular junctions, leads to intense muscle contraction, doesn't affect smooth muscle directly. And in terms of taser safety, there have been over 200,000 officers who have been tased in training, and 5,000 reported taser deployments to date with no causal effects of death found. So after a 5-second taser ride, this is what they like to call it, which is a great description, I think, on numerous subjects. There were no ECG changes, no cardiac cell injuries, no hyperkalemia, no acidosis. Now that's 5 seconds of a taser ride. What about patients who are tasered continuously or over and over again? That's the question. And it probably doesn't have any direct cardiac effect, but as I said earlier, it probably affects them metabolically or exacerbates the metabolic acidosis that's going on. I don't have this video available through this site, but if you haven't seen anyone tasered, you can Google taser or excited delirium on the web and see thousands of them. So let me just shut that down, and we'll start up the next one here in a second.